Welcome to the Divine Style podcast, where the journey to self-love and spiritual awakening begins. I'm your host, Gerlinda Stella, a psychic medium, intuitive life coach, and guide on your path to self-discovery. Here we delve deep into the heart of what it means to truly know and love oneself. Today, I have a very special guest and friend joining me. Kirsty Nancarrow is an award-winning journalist and businesswoman. She started her career in Sydney before a successful 15-year stint with ABC News. She's known for advocating regional journalists, co-founding Women in Media Far North Queensland, is now a respected media trainer and video educator. Kirsty is also dedicated to social justice and mental health causes. She recently published Himalayan Dreams, the story of Som Tamang. For anyone seeking a dose of inspiration, this is a compelling story of transformation and hope. I really enjoyed it, and I couldn't help by reading this book, feeling a desire to do more and be more. I want to welcome you today, Kirsty, and I really would love to know how this book came about. How was it spirit led? What was it about this story that needed to be told?
I think first it was meeting this amazing man who just happens to live in the same town that I do, in Cairns, in far north Queensland. I first met Som a couple of days after the 2015 earthquake, which happened on Anzac Day in Australia. And it was very catastrophic for a lot of rural villages in Nepal. 9,000 people died in the two earthquakes that happened in April and then May 2015. So when I reached out as an ABC journalist to interview this Nepalese man who'd been affected by this, I didn't know much about him or his involvement with charity work in Nepal. I got to know more about the work of Friends of Himalayan Children, which he set up in 2007, officially registered in 2008. And he had a children's hostel that they built for kids that were either orphaned or the families had too many children and needed a bit of help looking after one or two of the children to send them to school. The Friends of Himalayan Children provided a uniform, bags, books, school fees, and the kids that are looked after in the hostel obviously get 3 meals a day as well. So I've always been a bit of a social justice advocate. So it really kind of pricked my attention to meet this person who was doing this work in Nepal. And it was a country that I'd always had a fascination with. I worked with some Nepalis in an Indian restaurant in London many years before, and had always planned at some point to get over there. But he was somebody much closer to home that lived there, and I started to get to know the country through him and his experience. I'd become quite invested in Som and his work and started sponsoring the first of 3 girls by early 2016. And they asked me to MC their first International Women's Day event. And very much the work that Som does is all about empowering particularly girls and young women because of what they experience in rural Nepal, which is getting married early, having babies early, being expected to just look after children and the farm, and school is really not even thought about as a prospect, let alone employment in any kind of meaningful and gainful way financially. So I knew from covering natural disasters that there's this initial rush of support and then people kind of forget about it and move on, and the need is still there. So I thought if I'm going to go over, it's going to be enough time having passed that there's still a great need there, but the support has waned. So it was 18 months after that I went over to Nepal, and I spent a month volunteering as a teacher in Batasi School, which was still a dirt floor and tin sheds. And I was so inspired by the children's commitment to showing up every day, and they walk a couple of Ks down a steep mountain to get to the school, and from all over the village, from kilometres away, to get to their education. And they're there and they're prompt and they're there all day, and then they go home and they study and they get up in the morning and they exercise and they do their farm chores and they go to school 6 days a week. And I'm like, what an amazing um, legacy he's creating, and what a difference he's making to these children in Batassi. And yeah, I came back from that trip and decided that I needed to write his story.
I found it really amazing in the beginning of the book. You talk about that you had been suffering from your own PTSD. I mean, from Som's story, he had gone through so much and created something amazing from something that was really terrible that happened to him. How did you find that your healing worked through that sort of suffering part? How have you found that it's worked for you?
Well, going to Nepal really, in many senses, saved my life. I was at a very low place in 2016. I'd pretty much reached the top of my career at the ABC, and I started to notice a little things, a few little shifts in my personality and reacting to things, and then being really depressed. And I've always been quite a happy, joyful person. So these changes started kind of creeping in, and I have covered a lot of horrible things in my career, lots of murders and suicides and natural disasters, lots of death, and it all just seemed to start feeling like there was no relief from it. And there was a couple of incidents in particular. Um, People may recall in 2014, just a few days before Christmas, there was 7 children who were stabbed to death, and their mother, aunt, was responsible. So that was the first kind of real chink in the armor. And then about 6 months after that, I was the first camerawoman on scene at the Ravenshoe Cafe explosion, where a man had lost control of a ute. He had a medical episode, and it was a full cafe at lunchtime, and there was an explosion, and a couple of women died later from their injuries. And those sort of things, you always think about the first responders, the AMBOs, the fireys, the police. But journalists often have to go into those situations and news gather. And it was the most conflicted I've ever felt on the job. It was cold, it was wet. I was really under pressure doing live crosses, gathering interviews, trying to be respectful when all I wanted to do was jump in and help people. So yes, it started to eat away at me, and then I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD until a year after I came back from Nepal, but clearly I had it when I went over there. And I thought I didn't really have any sense of self-worth or purpose by that time. And I thought maybe it will help. I think Som's partner, Susan, actually might have suggested to me, and she's like, go and spend some time in the village and, you'll see. And Som actually said to me, there's no mental health problems in the village. She said everyone that goes there, it kind of goes away. And I thought, well, good, I've got to do something. And I've always been someone who volunteers, and I thought this is worth a shot, even though I'll be without my support network in a place in rural Nepal with no guarantee of electricity or running water or medical facilities or shops or any of the creature comforts. But I think it's worth a try. So going over there and actually having another focus for a month, which are those kids, and just seeing how happy they are with almost nothing, it really shifted my perspective on my own situation, and I did start to heal. So it was extremely therapeutic. It gave me a purpose again. And then I think the book was the extension of that purpose.
I mean, that's incredible because most of us are searching for meaning and purpose. So for you to be able to find that whilst in such a remote location is amazing. How did you find writing the book in terms of some of the trauma that came up? Because I mean, there are some sensitive topics and some confronting topics in terms of child exploitation and trafficking. How did your own PTSD get triggered and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I got treatment. Once I was diagnosed, I was able to get treatment, and I highly recommend EMDR treatment to anybody who's got PTSD. again, it's not just reserved for veterans and people that you might think. There's all forms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I did kind of build up my armor again and get some resilience back. I still avoided things that were likely to trigger me, but I'm an empathetic person, so it's hard to keep away from people's stories, even if they involve a deep level of trauma. And the thing about Som and many of the Nepalis I've met is they're not the same as us in terms of emotion. We're very emotional people, a lot of us in the Western world, and we share, we cry, we feel things deeply. And not to say that Som doesn't, but it was really interesting doing the interviews with him and talking about some of these things that had happened. And look, many of them didn't initially come from him. I did about 50 interviews for the book. And a lot of the time it was little tidbits that I'd heard from family members or people that he got to know very well here in Australia. And it was almost like, okay, I had everyone else kind of put the picture together for me. And then I'd go back to Som and I'm like, oh, tell me about this if you feel comfortable. And he's like, oh, yeah, that happened. And just didn't have the same level of gravity for him that it did for somebody consuming that story. So maybe that helped protect me, the fact that he didn't think it was a big deal.
Yeah, some people just look at things in practical terms, thinking it's just life.
It's just life. And look, it is. Having lived in the village, and I've volunteered twice, so I went back in 2018 and was there for another couple of weeks. Um, Life is simple, and it's not that life is cheap, but there's a certain level of acceptance about the lot you're given. So yeah, the expectations, I suppose, are lower for people in their own lives, and Som has changed that now through education and opportunities in the trekking industry, particularly for women. But the average person living in a rural village in Nepal, it's all about survival.
In the book, Som's wife, Susan, talks about having a culture shock in Nepal. I mean, from your experience, it sounds like it's really idyllic and beautiful, but on the flip side, it sounds like it's got a lot of challenges. Is rural Nepal somewhere that everyone should go?
It's not for everybody because you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. There's a lovely hostel, and it's you'll have a warm bed and ablutions and those kinds of things, but it's a simple life. So the reality is the electricity does go off sometimes, and the ebb and flow of village life is that people generally get up with the sun, they do their chores before school or work, and then long after, and then basically when the sun goes down, you go to bed. So it's a very different lifestyle. So if you're looking for a volunteer experience that allows you to check out at the end of the day and have all of your creature comforts, then this is not the experience for you. However, you have a bed, you have a shower. Sometimes cold. That was a bit of a challenge when I was first there. It was coming into winter, and the cold shower, washing the hair, was a bit challenging some days.
Ice baths are in now, so
Oh, that's right. It's actually a therapy now. People pay good money for it. But something that's not in short supply is the food. So they will feed you and feed you and feed you, and everyone's used to working in the fields and walking distances and all of that. So we've got to have fuel for that, right? So I was actually quite shocked by the generosity in terms of food, and it is mostly vegetarian because you're high up in the mountains. Occasionally, if there's festivals and the like, they'll have a chicken to kill or a goat or some buffalo. But largely, it's a vegetarian diet, and the food is delicious.
I think you've just completely sold me to go over there just for the food. I love Nepalese cuisine. I'm curious to know what was it like after that experience, coming home to Australia? I mean, having all the luxuries that we do have here. What was that like?
Yeah, and I remember feeling quite yuck about all of the things that beep around us. So I'd had a whole month of looking at the beautiful Himalayan range as I brushed my teeth outside every morning, and the peaceful sounds of the goats and the buffalo and the children. And I got used to not having a microwave beeping and a dishwasher and cars reversing and all of those sounds that we find so normal here. They were really jarring when I got home, and I just wanted to be minimalist and get rid of all this stuff and just have a simple life because I was happy and they're happy.
You really do make it sound so idyllic. I'm wondering what it was like for maybe some of the other people that you met. Did they have similar experiences in terms of big changes in their life, and were they there for sort of the same reasons?
There's many reasons why people go and volunteer, and I guess mental health is just one of them. But certainly, one of the volunteers who was there during my time did feel like he was at a bit of a midlife crisis, and that this had really given him some new direction. He was like, right, I know what I want to do now, and he sort of was all reinvigorated to change careers when he got home and involve himself more in teaching, which ultimately was the same outcome for me. What I realized, my dad was a teacher, and I'd never really wanted to be a teacher, but I'd always naturally mentored journalists throughout my career, and I loved that. I loved training people. I loved supporting people and empowering them. So being able to do that in front of a classroom and seeing that I could, even in children that spoke different language and or two different languages, and English was way down. It really kind of gave me that desire to be a trainer, and that is how I not only came back wanting to write the book, but I came back going, I want to have a training role at the ABC. And when that didn't eventuate for me, I was like, I gotta find another outlet for this. So that's how I started my first business as a media trainer in 2017, and then met Susie Cray at the ABC a few years before that, and her passion was training people in video and video editing. So, and I was a camera woman as well at the ABC. So we were both camera women. I was a storyteller. She was an editor. We both loved training. So we eventually joined forces to create a motion video training and production, so we could get up every day and do what we love, which is teaching people how to tell stories.
It's just beautiful that you've been able to channel your passions into something that provides insight and learning and growth for others. Do you feel that you've been divinely led, or that there's somebody in spirit that's sort of watching over you or guiding the way?
I know that I had a very strong connection with my grandfather, and he was my last surviving grandparent, and he died when I was 10. But even in that short time, we had this really strong bond around writing. And he was the one that sort of made the first comparison about me being a journalist with Yarn Event. So I kind of stuck, and I really wanted to be a journalist from the age of 9. So I suppose I felt like I was being led down the writing path, and really have connected with him a lot over this story, my grandfather. But more recently, I got I guess a reinforcement from the universe that this story had actually been delivered to me to write, in the sense, I mean, not in the sense that the words flowed easily and it just poured out of me. I don't want to create that impression. It was an incredibly hard task that required research and dedication and false starts and all of the rest of it. But in terms of the reason I'm writing this particular story at this particular time, if you don't mind me sharing, I had a session with you early last year, And I remember you asking me when I was in the meditation phase whether any names came to me. And this name just popped into my head, Priya. So we looked up what Priya was after the meditation, and it didn't mean anything to me off the bat. And then when we looked into it, we found this story which had been created by American filmmaker Ram Devanini in 2014 after this bus rape in Delhi, and he was so incensed about women being abused and raped and disempowered like this. He collaborated with Dan Goldman, who was a graphic or comic book designer, and they actually wrote a graphic novel called Priya's Shakti. And Priya is this central character who has this ambition as a child to become a teacher, and as she grows into a woman, she ends up being raped and then, of course, discarded by her family through shame, which is something that happens a lot in Nepal. And yeah, she thinks she's lost, and then she gets rescued by she comes to the attention of the goddess, and ultimately she is empowered to challenge this behavior and change this behavior, and ultimately becomes this symbol of Priya becomes a symbol of female empowerment. And the point of the book was to try and change some attitudes and elevate the voice of women. And I think it's fascinating that it was actually put together by two men, because you don't necessarily think about a biography of a Nepalese man as a female empowerment story, but this totally is, because everything that Som has done was motivated by wanting to ensure his younger sister Fulmaya, didn't end up being trafficked to India for the sex trade, or married off early, or not being able to go to school because she was a girl, which was the case. She didn't get to go to school until she was 11, and Som stood up to his parents, and he was working in the either in construction or in the trekking industry in Kathmandu by then. And he's basically like, if you don't support my sister going to school, I'm not sending any more money home. Basically, I will fund her education and my younger siblings. But yeah, I feel so strongly about this that that's what I'm prepared to do. I will disown you if you don't allow this to happen. Not even make this happen, but allow this to happen. So yeah, his whole motivation was changing what happened to girls in his village. And he's very proud of the fact that in the past few years, basically since Friends of Himalayan Children started, there's been almost no incidents where girls have been groomed and taken from the village and trafficked to India. So that's a huge achievement.
I truly believe that good always overcomes evil. And by that, I mean that God always finds a way to turn things that seem negative into a really positive thing where changes can and do happen. I mean, this book has a little bit of everything. I know for me, it's been really inspirational in making me want to do and be more. What would you say the book is about?
I mean, at the core of it, it's a story about female empowerment and the passion of one man to to the single-mindedness of an individual to make change. So even though Som grew up in incredibly impoverished situation and became a child slave himself at age 10, he never kind of limited his vision of an alternative future for himself. And now he's made that possible for himself and also all of the children that he's helped in his village. So it is it is many things. It's an adventure story. So if people really like reading about adventures and trekking, I mean, he's got a real adventurous spirit. So he's a bit cheeky. He's a bit of a hustler. So, you follow Som's adventures of basically making stuff happen for himself. He doesn't accept what the cards that he's been dealt. He's like, well, I can probably do something about this, and he does. And he comes across some very interesting characters on the way. There's a couple of Australian actors in the book, which is part of the story of how he got to Australia. And as you say, there's a beautiful love story in there as well, which is kind of threaded throughout the book. And so, yeah, it's part travel book, part adventure, and part, I suppose, historical. If for anyone who doesn't know much about Nepal and wants to learn a bit more about some of the cultural traditions and the politics and the history of the Civil War and all of that, that's all kind of woven in because that's part of Som's story. He's lived through those events. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. So it'll definitely keep you on your toes.
The book does have so much in it, and part of the intent of writing it was to inspire people to get involved and to make a difference. How can people help support SOM's charity and Himalayan children or Friends of Himalayan Children?
Yeah, there's various ways people can help. They can become a sponsor, and you can just make a monthly donation. That's probably what they prefer to do. I know everyone sort of wants to focus on a child, but I guess the way that support the models for support are changing in organisations, and you can make monthly donations through Friends of Himalayan Children. So that's f-hc.org. You can sponsor children. They do from time to time have a particular child that they call out to have sponsorship for. And there's also the opportunity to go and volunteer, and you can actually tie that in with a trekking experience. So Som also has a trekking company called Take on Nepal, which is female focused. They do a lot of women only treks, and they have a lot of women guides, which is unusual in Nepal. It was pretty groundbreaking that they did that. So you can combine the two. You can go and have a volunteer experience, and then you can have guides from the village who will go and take you to various places like Langtang or Annapurna Base Camp or Everest Base Camp. So that's an option as well if you actually want to physically immerse yourself in the support way. And then there's also a new program that has just been launched called the Rorks program through Rotary International. And that is specifically to help fund the last 2 years of Batassi school. So when Som went to school, his school finished at year 5, which is one of the reasons why he ended up enslaved in Kathmandu, because he was told he could have the promise of an education in the city, and he followed someone from the village there, and then ended up in a situation where he was spending his days cooking, cleaning, looking after the children, and not able to go to school himself. So he was always really driven to make sure that the school in his village was able to educate kids right until the end. And at the moment it's year 10, and this Rotary program supporting Friends of Himalayan Children is all about getting those last 2 years of school, not just the buildings, but the teachers to go in there, the accommodation for the students and the teachers. And that's Som's dream, and that's my dream. That was the reason that I really wanted to write this book, to let people know that this work is happening and how important it is in terms of changing the lives of children, and particularly girls in rural Nepal.
That's awesome. I just love hearing about how through changing other people's lives, you're changing your own at the same time. It all is aligned. That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing talking with you. And I will put links in the show notes for anybody who is wanting to get their hands on a copy of this book. I highly recommend it. I'm sure you will be just as inspired as I am to want to help this cause, and really I love the title of the book too, Himalayan Dreams. So it's so aligned and so beautiful.
Yeah, I hope it inspires people to go over to Nepal, or at least reflect on their own life and how good we have it.
Yeah, and how we can make a difference even in small ways. But
that's right. If some can make a difference, we can all make a difference.
As we end today's episode of the Divine Style podcast, I extend my deepest gratitude for your presence and openness on this journey of self-love, self-discovery, and spiritual growth. Farewell for now, and may your journey inward bring you the self-love you seek.